I've been waiting 60 years to come here.
Talk about religious experience.
That is exactly. So here's what's up, man? One coach to another, man. Yeah. That was fun. It was really fun. I've been waiting 60 years to come here.
Talk about religious experience.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Speechless. I'm your host, Kev Phares, 23-year-old conservative law student here at Liberty University. And if you're looking for any of our other hosts, we are also going to have David, Kate, and Fabian Garcia join me later as we get ready for the Breakaway USA debate coverage here on not only my channel, but Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, everywhere under the sun. No matter where you guys are watching from, make sure you like, subscribe, share, comment, all that fun stuff. We got a lot we're going to talk about here today, and I'm excited to be able to reconnect a little bit with my friends with Breakaway USA and everything. You might notice my spaces look a little bit different. Here's the thing is, while I might look different, while the setting might change, don't worry. The conservative values will always stay the same. We're going to be right here tonight covering all the debate coverage. And so if you want to make sure you don't miss a minute of the debate, like I said, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment what you think, share it with your friends. We're going to have a lot of fun here tonight. As I mentioned earlier, David will be joining us. Fabian will be joining us to talk a little bit more about what's been going on in this race before the debate, so we can really talk about what we're going to expect here tonight from J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. J.D. Vance being obviously Trump's running mate, Tim Walz being Kamala Harris's, and we're going to talk about them, what we can expect, who we expect to win, what we kind of think their issues might be. As you might have seen at the very beginning of this, you saw Tim Walz at the football game, at the Minnesota-Michigan football game this week. He got a big hug from the coach, saying, from one coach to another, it's so great to have you here. It's such a pleasure. Yeah, you're going to see things like that. That is what Tim Walz is going to do. And like I said, I'll talk about it more with David and Fabian soon. But that is what you are going to see. You are going to see Tim Walz try to frame himself as this small town teacher and coach, and not like the shill for China, the CCP, the establishment, and a globalist government that he really is. On the other hand, you'll also have J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, a Yale law graduate who came up from practically nothing, now being a vice presidential candidate after serving just 2 years in the Senate. Stark contrast, despite the two men framing themselves very comparably. And you'll see that tonight. But in the event that you've been following my channel and you've been wondering, hey, Kev, where have you been? Why have you not been streaming? What's been going on? Well, as many of you know, I am a full-time law student here at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. If you noticed last time when we had the presidential debate just 3 weeks ago, the last time I went live, I was live with the Turning Point USA chapter here at Liberty University. If you have been subscribing to my channel on YouTube and some other various places such as TikTok and Instagram, you might see that I'm interviewing students. I'm out on campus. I'm talking to people with these little lapel mics. What are your thoughts? What's going on this election? What do you think is going to happen? Who are you voting for? And if you want to make sure you see all of those videos, follow me everywhere. Speechless with Kev. I'd love to hear from you guys. But we have a lot more to cover here tonight. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to talk about what we've been seeing from these campaigns. We're going to discuss what we really think is going to happen tonight. And I want to make sure you guys are involved. So make sure you guys are commenting. Be in the comment section. Let me know what you guys are thinking through all of this. And to start out, I want to talk a little bit about what we've seen with I wanted to make sure we get to Tim Walz discussing Tim Walz and the Chinese controversy and what's going on there. Everybody, I know that this might seem a little chaotic. Again, as a law student, there's a lot of things that go on. I just had my midterms back on Friday. And I'll tell you, I read 6,000 pages a week. I dive deep into elements of the law that many people who have never been engaged in law school might never even think of. And by this time of night, my brain is fried. And so the fact of the matter is tonight, you will see that this debate begins at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is very late for me at this point. But I want to talk about, there's been a controversy coming out about Tim Walz and the Chinese Communist Party. So there's a claim that Walz was in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square protests, which is undercut and unearthed by newspaper reports. So a newly unearthed report contradicts previous claims made by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz about his travel to China, including a claim that Democratic vice presidential nominee was in Hong Kong for a teaching position in 1989 during the Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protests that ended in hundreds of protesters killed by the Chinese government. The discrepancy over Walz's relationship to China comes ahead of Tuesday's vice presidential debate in New York, which is tonight, obviously, where Republican allies of J.D. Vance have signaled that the GOP vice presidential nominee may use Walz's history in China to attack his rival. Walz has regularly organized and chaperoned trips to China during his time as a teacher prior to entering politics. Walz previously said he visited Hong Kong in May of '89, weeks before the Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing, during a 2014 hearing of the Congressional Executive Committee on China honoring the 25th anniversary of the protest. Walz, then Minnesota congressman, appeared to recall specific details about his trip to the region at the time. Walz further claimed in a June 2019 radio interview that he was in Tiananmen Square. He said, quote, I was in Hong Kong on June 4th, 1989, when, of course, Tiananmen Square happened. And I was in China after that. It was a very strange, of course, all outside transmissions were blocked, Voice of America, and of course, there was no phones or email or anything. This is what Tim Walz had to say. In fact, I can even play a little bit of this interview for you. Take a listen. And I will admit this is from CNN, but take a listen to this piece of this interview.
When did you live in China?
Late 80s.
Okay.
So, I was there. I see this happening in Hong Kong as a more serious note. I was in Hong Kong on June 4th, 1989, when, of course, Tiananmen Square happened. And I was in China after that. It was very strange because, of course, all outside transmissions were blocked, Voice of America. And, of course, there was no phones or email or anything. So I was kind of out of touch. It took me a month to know the Berlin Wall had fallen when I was living there. So
when did you live in China?
During a 2009 hearing of the Congressional Executive Commission on China to commemorate the Tiananmen Square protest, Walz claimed that he was in Hong Kong at the time. Walz is claimed to be at the Tiananmen Square protests many more times than he has actually even probably been to China. When asked by CNN if Walz was in Hong Kong during Tiananmen Square protests, the Harris campaign was unable to provide evidence to substantiate Walz's claims. A source close to Walz told CNN that, quote, the point Governor Walz is making when he discusses this is that some folks in the World Teach program discussed dropping out after Tiananmen Square. But he continued on with the program because he believed it was important for the Chinese people to learn about the American democracy and American history. Wait. So it starts off as, I was in China during Tiananmen Square. I was in China during this to teach about democracy. And now it's just, the point is, it's important people know about democracy. Wait, but the question, campaign, and Mr. Walz, were you there as you so many times have claimed? The answer is no. Tim Walz wasn't in China for the Tiananmen Square incident. In fact, Tim Walz doesn't even really support China. Doesn't really support a pro-American movement in China. Tim Walz supports China. Tim Walz very, very possibly is an agent for the Chinese Communist Party. There's a reason why they're much more favorable to a Democrat nominee for president than a Republican. And it's because Republicans see them as what they are, the Chinese, as an adversarial government, as an adversarial nation. Tim Walz, however, not only has the very possible ability to be a Chinese Communist Party agent, Tim Walz also is just a liar. Tim Walz never served in combat, as he once claimed. Tim Walz was not in China during the Tiananmen Square incident. Tim Walz has done nothing of serious significance in his life other than becoming a career politician. Sure, maybe he was a teacher at one point. Maybe he was a good old boy football coach at some point. But all of that is relatively insignificant compared to where he is now and the lies that he is told to get there. And so that is what I expect to see tonight on the campaign trail. And as we continue to consider the real possibility of the lies that Tim Walz says, I also want to discuss the advertisements that might be flooding your television screens. Now, I don't know if you're anything like me, but you guys might sit down on a Sunday afternoon to watch some football. I don't know if you guys saw any of the games this weekend. Quite interesting. Definitely some unfortunate bets made on DraftKings by myself. I don't know about you. But I have been flooded by Kamala Harris advertisements. And so I think it's worth taking a look and a listen to some of these, discussing them, debunking them, and more. So we're going to take a look and listen to a few different Kamala Harris advertisements that have been coming out recently. We'll start with this one. This one is called Focused. This advertisement is called Focused. Take a look and listen.
We all know costs are too high, but while corporations are gouging families, Trump is focused on giving them tax cuts. But Kamala Harris is focused on you.
Wait. So let's just even restart this. I think it's worth restarting this advertisement. Let's take a look and listen once again here.
We all know costs are too high, but while corporations are gouging families, Trump is focused on giving them tax cuts. But Kamala Harris is focused on you.
Kamala Harris is focused on you. Isn't Kamala Harris, out of the two that are running for president right now, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, who is currently serving in an elected office? Is Donald Trump or is it Kamala Harris? Give you a big hint. So much as to say the answer. It's Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is currently serving as the vice president of the United States. Now, this is what made me so mad, and I never really recapped on my channel much about the presidential debate, but this is one thing that made me so mad, is everything that Kamala says, everything, every policy proposal, every idea she has that she comes up with, that she spits out and then rebukes in this next sentence, whether that's on fracking, the economy, immigration, anything, every idea that Kamala has can simply be discussed as, why aren't you doing it right now? Why aren't you doing it right now? Why aren't you doing it right now? Because right now, Kamala, you are the vice president. And so for her to start this ad in this way, where she says, costs are so high, you're getting gouged, and somehow it's Donald Trump's fault? What? It's Donald Trump's fault? Give me a break.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
She'll make groceries more affordable by cracking down on price gouging. And she'll cut housing costs by taking on corporate speculators. Middle-class families build America. We need a leader who has their back.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Why aren't you doing it now? Why aren't you doing it now? That's the question that we should all be asking Kamala Harris. Why aren't you doing it now? Because you could do all these things to some respect. And also, let's talk about how vague some of these promises are. Once again, let's go back here. We'll go back for the last 20 seconds one more time. How vague some of these promises are. Let's pause at the promises and then actually see what could you do about them.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
Okay, so first question you should ask, why aren't you doing it now? Why aren't you building up the middle class? You have been vice president for the last 4 years. Where's Joe Biden been? It's an easy answer, everybody. He's been sleeping. He hasn't been doing anything. Been weekend at Biden's for 4 years. And Kamala, where have you been? Actually, a great question. Kamala, where have you been? So why aren't you doing it now? Second thing, what does that actually even mean, building up the middle class? Well, then she goes on to tell you with more vague nothings. Here we go.
She'll make groceries more affordable by
Okay.
cracking down on price gouging.
What does that even mean? How do you do that? How do you do that? She'll make groceries more affordable. That's the promise. This is the how are you going to do it? By cracking down on price gouging. What does that mean? Okay, so let's also consider the implication of what she's saying right there. Is that her claim is that groceries are expensive because of price gouging. That's also what she's saying, which in and of itself is a dishonest assessment of the current state of affairs. It truly is. It's a dishonest assessment of the current state of affairs and the fact that she is trying to manipulate your mind to believe that the way that we make groceries more affordable is by cracking down on price gouging. Now, there are other ways in which you can make groceries more affordable. There are also many reasons other than price gouging. I would say that price gouging isn't even top 5 reasons that groceries are expensive. And so the reason why groceries are expensive are because we have a very flooded market right now. And a better attack, if you wanted to attack Trump on that issue, you would discuss the bailout checks, the stimmy checks that we all got during COVID. You want to know one reason is because the influx of money into the market that we've never seen before. And now, could you also come back and say that it has to do with the omnibus packages and the consistent record spending we've had under this administration? Absolutely. I'd say that's even more. But if you wanted to attack Trump on why things are expensive, you should go after the stimulus checks. But you want to know why Kamala won't? The reason why Kamala and her campaign won't go after that is because it's something they want to do. They'd never admit it, but they love that. They loved the idea of government redistributing wealth during COVID. They loved that idea. So that's why she won't attack it. The one thing that you could actually blame Trump for why things are expensive, you won't attack him. Why? Because you agree with it. Because you don't care about making things more affordable. You care about having all the power in the world, including that to redistribute people's wealth. But let's keep going, because that's what she says she's going to do about price gouging.
And she'll cut housing costs by taking on corporate speculators.
What does that mean? What does that mean? What is a corporate speculator? So she's going to reduce housing costs by taking on corporate speculators. What in the flying heck is a corporate speculator? My best guess, and the reason why I asked that is because I have an okay idea of what it might be. My guess would be that a corporate speculator is somebody who from a very, very large corporation that looks at housing in an attempt to buy up large properties so then they can rent it or sell it at large profits. They come in, they gentrify essentially, and then they sell off that same property. That's probably, I'd assume, that would be definitively, you'd have somebody who's from a corporate world, then a speculator, somebody who's watching the market and attempting to manipulate it through large monetary investments. So that's what I would assume a corporate speculator is. But you see how much the average person, you're not sitting at home. You're not sitting at home around your kitchen table saying, man, housing costs are so big right now. Let's hope those corporate people aren't speculating. I wish the government would really do something about those corporate speculators. No one's saying that. You want to know why? This just shows you how out of touch the Harris campaign is with the average person. They'll start off with a problem that everybody agrees is a problem. Housing costs, expensive. True. Maybe it has to do with the fact that the Fed has had record increases to loan or to interest rates, and then only just recently cut it for the first time in the entire Biden presidency. First time it's been cut. Maybe that's why housing prices are out of control. Oh, no. It's the corporate speculators. man, maybe it really sucks how my grocery bill, I get like 4 things and it's like $75 now. It really sucks. Maybe it's because like we've made it so that there's so much money in the market, and the way the market that causes inflation. Maybe it's because the Inflation Reduction Bill did the exact opposite of what its title insinuated. No, Kamala says. No. That's exactly how she says it too. No. It's actually price gouging. That's Kamala for you. That's exactly what she does right here. And she makes it seem like, and she uses these words that have no meaning or that are so nebulous that you have to try to interpret it entirely on your own. And so that's the first advertisement from Kamala Harris. Now, this next one, it's called Wanted. The next number two, the next Kamala Harris advertisement, Wanted is what this one's called. Take a look and a listen right here. We'll go through it. Very similar.
I want to turn to the issue of abortion.
For 52 years, they've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it.
I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that.
Okay, I also want to. So what they're obviously trying to do here is play off the lack of public knowledge as to what Roe v. Wade actually did. Roe v. Wade just sends the issue of abortion back to the states. Roe v. Wade does not ban abortion in and of itself, or getting rid of Roe v. Wade does not ban abortion in and of itself. It doesn't necessarily say you don't have a right to abortion. It just says you don't necessarily have a right to abortion under the 14th Amendment, the interpretation of a privacy clause. No, you really don't have. You really have here a predatory attempt from the Harris campaign to try to manipulate public opinion based on disingenuous education regarding the Roe v. Wade decision. And so that's what they start with Trump and saying, like, I'm proud of terminating Roe v. Wade. And also, they'll quote that from Fox News, but they won't quote the fact that, yes, it actually, like, most people do want Roe v. Wade overturned, but when you ask them, because they don't know what Roe v. Wade is, they say no, because they believe Roe v. Wade bans abortion, like the Roe v. Wade protects from a ban of abortion. That's not true. No. Again, Roe v. Wade sends it back to the states. So really what we're seeing here is just disingenuous reporting from the Harris campaign. So
it took courage to do it.
And then eventually we get to a very, very long run-on sentence.
Around.
This is a major run-on sentence. Let's just wait until we hear a period. Everybody, let's wait until we can find a period in this sentence from Kamala.
Doing it.
I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted?
Okay, we're going to start with, you want to talk about this is what people wanted. Wait for the period.
Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that.
Okay. She never even actually really got to a period. We're going to try to understand that sentence. That was like 30 seconds-ish of a sentence that never actually was.
You want to talk about this is what people wanted?
This is what people want.
Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that.
Her husband
a 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being.
So the thing is that this sounds like it could be a sentence. This sounds like it's a point, but it's not. That's the crazy thing is, so You want to talk about this is what people want. And you want to talk. Okay, then she just starts rambling fragments of pretend stories, of hypotheticals that Democrats always run through. There's incest and bleeding out in the back of car, and you're going to arrest a person for attempt abortion, and that's how she sounds to me. But that's exactly what she's doing. She doesn't actually say anything, and she doesn't even actually form a coherent full sentence. You'd think that she's probably just taking notes from her predecessor, but that's besides the point. Let's finish off this ad.
Forced to carry a pregnancy to term? They don't want that. I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Okay, so that's obviously her very blanket abortion ad to just try to say Trump bad, hate women, and manipulate the American public off of the misconceptions regarding the Roe v. Wade decision and the Dobbs v. Jackson decision. Which that's the fascinating thing is the Harris campaign and Kamala Harris and the progressives. They always want to say bring up Roe v. Wade. Nobody ever wants to say Dobbs v. Jackson. Nobody ever actually wants to talk about the case that overturned the precedent, why it did, or anything like that. Nobody ever wants to talk about the fact that it's actually a democratic decision to say, hey, states, you should have the right to decide for yourselves and vote on your own abortion laws. And nobody ever wants to talk about that. But the Trump campaign is responding to ads like this and attacks like this very simply by avoiding any conversation regarding abortion in general. There are several states currently coming out with abortion comments regarding or abortion votes in some way on their ballots this upcoming election. And a lot of Republicans are just ignoring to talk about it because they see it as an election killer. Whether or not it is, we'll see at the ballot box, and compare it to 2022 when the first round of a lot of abortion legislation was being put on the ballots. We'll see. I think that it really depends on on where you are, if you're really asking me. But that's what I would say. And I also love to see the people in the comment section. So don't forget to comment, guys. Let me know what you guys are thinking, what you guys see, everything like that. I'd appreciate it. Keep the comments coming. Let me know. Does she really think it? Maybe she does. Maybe she does. I'll get you your guys' comments. We got some more ads here to talk about. Obviously, the debate will be coming up in just about 23 minutes. I should be having David and Fabian joining me soon to discuss what we're expecting for the debate and helping me make sure we get the live stream all set up for it. But they should be joining me soon. We'll transition this to a Breakaway USA show. Breakaway USA, an amazing organization. So be ready for that, everybody. Now let's get on to this next ad that we have. This is called All Americans. All Americans. This is Kamala Harris once again. Can't wait to hear what stupid crap she says. Here's this.
As a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on investing right now in you, the American people. And we can chart a new way forward. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Okay, a new way forward. A new way forward. That's another, obviously, one of her kind of pitches that she's putting in there. I kind of want to go through this bit by bit once again. Just so I
As a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat?
Okay. Yeah, because it probably wasn't pertinent. And so that's the funny thing. So if you were going up to a witness while they were on the stand and you asked the question, are you a Republican or a Democrat? If I was opposing counsel, I guarantee you, I would say objection relevance. Because there wasn't any. So it's a really good soundbite when you don't actually think about it. And that's really honestly, that's a lot of, I want to listen to it one more time. Just listen to it one more time.
As a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat?
It's a really good soundbite. But with the majority of Democrat policy, when you think about most of what they say, or when you hear most of what they say, Democrats, you instantly think to yourself, that doesn't actually, that makes no sense. It might sound really, really good in a moment. But then you think about it and you're like, it makes no sense. So when she comes out of the gate saying, when I was a prosecutor, I never asked if a witness or a victim was a Republican or a Democrat. Yeah, that's because you'd have no reason to, idiot. And then she comes out with this next part.
Thing I ever asked them, are you okay? And that's the kind.
Are you okay? Well, ask me that now, Kamala. Ask me that after I'm done filling up my car with gas. No, I'm not okay. Because of you, idiot.
Kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on investing right now in you, the American people.
Well, then why aren't you doing it? Once again, we go through all these ads. Why aren't you doing it? Huh? Why aren't you doing it? It's the main question that should be asked. Why aren't you doing it?
We can chart a new way forward. I'm Kamala Harris, and
once again, a new way forward. What the hell does that mean? A new way forward? A new way forward. What was the last 4 years then, Kamala? An old way backward? What? Does anybody else just sit in silence for at least 15 minutes a day, contemplating whether or not a voter who considers voting for Kamala Harris? Do you ever sit for 15 minutes plus, just sitting in silence, contemplating how somebody could vote for the most brain rot dribble that American politics has pretty much ever seen? And we had the New Deal in the 1930s. And this is a billion times dumber. Have you guys ever seen the movie Idiocracy? We are living it. We are living Idiocracy. And this is a perfect example. We are living in Idiocracy. Kamala Harris is the Idiocracy candidate. We have the dumbest person ever running for president. So Kamala Harris would likely want to tout the fact that she's a woman, that she's black or Indian, depending on what day it is, or who she's talking to. But I think the real honor that should be bestowed upon her is that she is the dumbest person to ever run for president. Truly the dumbest person to ever run for president. And if you want to know even further about that, I want to share this clip with you guys. I don't know if you guys have heard. If you're not from the East Coast, you might not have seen anything about this. But Kamala Harris, I'm sorry, not Kamala Harris. She might as well. But a truly big disaster that has been plaguing the East Coast is Hurricane Helene, who's claimed many lives, has obviously destroyed billions and billions worth of damage. And it's just an important time, not only obviously pray for all those families. If anybody who is currently watching has been affected by the hurricane, I pray for you. I only got rain from it here where I live in Virginia. And so I can only imagine how many other states further south of me got hit, or even a little bit further west in Tennessee. But this is a good time. Now, I don't want to politicize a tragedy. But it does serve as an important time to remind you how presidential candidates would react in times of crisis such as this. Well, Donald Trump showed how he would react. He went down, I think today, if not even yesterday, and helped FEMA hand out water bottles look at damage, things like that. Just a few years ago, this is what Kamala Harris had to say regarding emergency response. We'll take a look at this, and then we'll have David and Fabian join.
Communities and our communities of color that are most impacted by these extreme conditions and impacted by issues that are not of their own making. And so
women.
Absolutely. And so we have to address this in a way that is about giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. And if we want people to be in an equal place, sometimes we have to take into account those disparities and do that work.
So what an amazing opinion, honestly, is that we should help people based on their skin color get out of these instances. That's exactly what we should do. And so to help me dissect that a little bit more, we're going to bring on my good friends. Of course, we have Fabian Garcia, we have David Kate. We're going to figure out our right.
There we go.
There we go. We
got
you guys on.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say I was watching a little bit of that clip, and she absolutely said nothing there. It was a bunch of word salad as always, and I think that the fact that she said more than a word salad during the debate is incredible. But every time I see a clip of her talking anywhere else besides that, she literally sounds horrible. So
I would disagree a little bit because I feel like she's a little smarter than we give her credit for. I think she's a very dumb person, but I think she's very intelligent in the way that she speaks about socialism and Marxism. She says we all want them to be in the same place. So she's speaking for us now, when in reality we know that when the only political structure where everyone is in the same place is communism. So that's exactly what she's touting right there. And people listening to that may not know better will say, you know what, that actually sounds good. Wait, why can't we all be the exact same? Well, because there's something called communism, and we've tried it many times and it never worked. So yeah, that communist doublespeak really pops out at me whenever I hear it.
That's exactly what I was just saying too. I don't know how much you guys caught. I know you guys were getting set up and stuff, but I was going through some different Kamala Harris ads because my Sunday NFL football has been plagued with a bunch of Kamala Harris ads, especially being in Virginia here, where it's within the margin of error, not necessarily seen as a swing state, but still within the margin of error. I'm sure you see a lot, David, being down in Georgia. Are you in Georgia right now too, Fabian?
I am. I'm sitting right across from Mr. David.
My God, we got all of us on the East Coast. It's crazy, but but I don't know for anybody. This is a quick aside for everybody, but when we used to do this show, we were all in different time zones. It used to be David on the East Coast, I was in Central Standard, and Fabian was all the way on the West Coast on Pacific Standard. And so it's insane that we're actually all in the same time zone for once. And of course, it's at a time when we have a debate scheduled at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. Whoever decided that is an absolute idiot. But
probably Kamala.
I was going to say it's most likely like Tim Walz, right? Because he doesn't want people to see his performance tonight.
Oh, absolutely.
JD Vance is going to mop the floor with him. Go ahead. My bad.
Is exactly what you were saying, though, Fabian, is that so much of what we hear out of the Democrats is these things that they say very, very vague statements, or they'll say things that might, to the untrained ear, sound nice, but really say very little, or say something that is actually evil. And I was just covering that with a lot of Kamala Harris's ads. She'll say things. She had one thing where she talked about how what she was doing is she wanted to cut the price, or she wanted to cut the cost of housing. And the way that she said she was going to cut the cost of housing is by cracking down on corporate speculators. Now, I'm not a real estate agent or anything, but what is a corporate speculator?
It's like a gold or oil speculator. You know, they go and they dig holes in the ground and they speculate about things. I honestly have no idea what the hell that lady's talking about. I don't know that she does either. I heard that when she picked Tim Walz, she was dizzy. She was sleep deprived. I don't know if you saw that. I don't know, but it's just nothing makes sense.
It does actually. The reason she picked him, because if it was not him, it was Shapiro, right? And Shapiro was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do this. Give me the position, right?" And he was like, whatever you want me to do, I'll go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
Right. So she chose him because she does not want him to outshine her. And
Well,
that's a
and Shapiro was a little too Jewish, I'd say.
that played a major factor. He's a little too pro-Israel as well, right? Let's add that in there. But I think that's a key factor as well in there. And they were like, how can we get a white male that doesn't play into the Jewish part? Tim Walz. And so they're stuck with him. They have a lot of record to defend tonight, in my opinion, especially the main thing that I just hope they keep hammering over and over. Kev, I like what you said while I was watching your pre-show a little bit, that all they just keep having to nail is that, why haven't y'all done this? Why haven't y'all done this? Y'all had the opportunity to do this. Why haven't y'all done this? And I'd add another important thing that they should add, in my opinion, is that, hey, Tim Walz, why have you implemented such a radical policy when it comes down to sanctuary for kids, running away from certain states that may not provide gender affirming care or whatever it is? 66% of Democrats even say leave the kids alone. So that is a very extreme policy. And I'll just nail that over and over and over.
Absolutely. And so that's what I really want us to get into. We got I think it's about 10 minutes. And production, I'm giving it over to you on making sure that we can get the debate and everything live streamed up for everybody who's watching, and everybody, no matter where you're watching from, make sure you check out not only if you're watching on any of my channels, Speechless with Kev, but also make sure you check out everything Breakaway USA, because Breakaway USA, we are on the cutting edge of conservative media, but not just conservative media, truly free thought media. We have a lot of things in the works, been working on a lot of big things. And we have a great group of content creators from many different backgrounds. I myself am a young law student. We have David and Fabian, who come from great walks of life. We have documentarians. We have a lot of different people. And so make sure you guys check out Breakaway USA. But in the little time that we have, I want to talk about what we expect from both of our candidates, just as David was kind of putting in there a little bit. What should J.D. Vance do, and what will he do versus Tim Walz? What should Tim Walz do versus what will he do? Fabian, what are your thoughts?
I think Tim Walz has an idea of what he's going to do, but I don't know that it's going to survive the first round of questioning with what J.D. Vance has been preparing. I know that he's been preparing with, Tim Walz has been preparing with Pete Buttigieg, our favorite gay guy ever in the history of gay men. And I also know that, J.D. Vance is an incredible debater. If you watch any of his debates, he's very quick on his feet. And I've heard a lot of people, especially on Fox News today, I think we were watching, they said, I hope he sticks to policy. But you can't just stick to policy. I think you have to, a lot of people don't know anything bad about Tim Walz. You've never seen anything negative on him on the mainstream media. So I think he has to tell people, listen, this is a real guy that you're dealing with, not the person you see on, in front of this stage waving his hand like he has, some kind of dysfunction in his hands. But this is a real guy. Here's what he's done. You make the determination whether or not you think he was a good pick for someone, and why would she pick him if he's such a bad guy. What does that tell you about her? Kind of leave the door open and let them think about what it is that he's done.
Absolutely. David, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would push on the entire night, honestly, besides what I just said, is that do you support what Kamala Harris has flip-flopped on? Because famously, you're against fracking. Are you supporting this immigration, approach that you've suddenly taken, right? Because she's flip-flopped on so many positions, and he's actually radical, right? He implements a lot of extreme policies that a lot of individuals don't agree with. I don't even have to talk about independents. I already talked about how 66% of Democrats say, hey, leave the kids alone, right? Like, why should I, as a state, provide sanctuary for kids that are running away from parents because they're not able to get a certain procedure in that state? It's absolutely ridiculous. That it's very extreme policy. But the main thing is, I would say, hey, do you support Kamala's new stance? And if you do, why did you not support that previously? Why is your state currently banning fracking and has done everything that they possibly can to impose as many regulations as possible to ensure that there isn't as much fracking, or I think it's completely limited at this point in Minnesota? So various things that I would say, hey, suddenly Kamala supports this. Do you? And we'll see what he has to say for that, right? Because I would love to. My main thing is I'd love to see Kamala say one thing and then Tim Walz say something else, right? That'd be incredible to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even when I start looking at some of these things, I think that you're right. We really need to be JD Vance needs to hammer significantly in on Tim Walz's and Kamala's progressive record. They obviously not only keep flip-flopping, but Tim Walz has himself said we need to embrace a certain level of socialism, or he said, or what did he say? He said one person's neighborliness is another person's socialism. And so the thing is that they continuously say the quiet part out loud. And so when they come out with these disingenuous advertisements that say, oh, now Kamala is going to be tough on the border. Now she's going to be good on the economy. Now she's finally going to represent the American people. Not only do you need to call them out for their previous radicalism, you also need to push simply the idea of what is it you actually believe? What is it that you actually believe? I feel like that's something that needs to be tossed around a little bit, as well as kind of a tertiary point that really should become more primary. As I said earlier, is why isn't it happening right now? Why isn't it happening right now with Kamala? I mean, so make that known. What should have been done in the presidential debate that Trump got caught up playing 3-on-1 against the moderators too. He should have just been saying the whole time, why isn't she doing it? Why isn't she doing it? She should be doing it. She's currently the vice president. That's what she should be doing, or that's what he should be doing. That's what JD Vance should do, and he should really go in hard on it. As for Tim Walz needs to try not to talk. I mean, honestly, Tim Walz. I guess his best defense of anything that he's come up with is that JD Vance is weird, and I've said it multiple times on my show. Frankly, JD Vance is weird because he is a Yale law graduate that was also like editor of their law review, which I don't know if you guys know what that means, but it basically means you're incredibly smart. Anybody who gets to that level of academia is going to be a little weird. I can tell you, being in law school, there's a lot of weird people in law school. You're going to meet them. And so we want to know why he might be a little awkward, why he might be a little weird. It's because he's brilliant, because he knows the rule of law better than Tim Walz and Kamala Harris combined.
Well, Tim Walz, Tim Walz actually does know the rule of law. It's just the Chinese rule of law from the Communist Party of China, not the American rule of law, because everything that we've seen him pass in his state, from tampon Tims to allowing boys or anyone in any bathroom to making his state a sanctuary city, these are all communist policies. So I think he does know the communist law. He's just not really aware of what the American law is.
Mm-hmm.
JD Vance, man. Go ahead, Kev. My bad.
I just wanted to address these. We're getting these are people that I know from high school in the comment section. Everybody keep the comments coming. But I'm voting for RFK. That's perfectly fine. You can vote for RFK, but RFK even dropped out and said vote for Trump. So if you're doing that, then like you're just kind of. I mean, I hate to tell somebody they're wasting their vote when they're voting for somebody they want to, but you're wasting your vote. And so,
I mean, say it how it is, because they are wasting their vote. I mean, listen, if you're not in a battleground state, I could care less what you do. But if you are in a battleground state, you are wasting literally your vote. And I can't take you serious at that point, right? I had friends up until a couple years ago that thought that it's not serious. Like, it doesn't matter who's the president, until they started to have a serious job, until they started to maybe, rent themselves, and they realized, oh crap, who I choose as a president has serious consequences. So voting for RFK has zero value right now, right? If you want to vote for RFK, that means you've got to vote for Trump, because RFK endorsed Trump. So that's simple.
I mean, you don't have to vote. Like, vote for whoever you want. I'm not here to tell you who you want to vote for, but I'm going to tell you what the repercussions of your vote are going to be. And so, yeah, you're right, David. Actually, really, I mean, if you vote, if you live, I mean, like, I'm from Illinois originally. If I voted for Trump in Illinois, it would mean nothing. It'd be like trying to yell at a man with a megaphone. You wouldn't hear me. That's essentially what voting for Trump does in Illinois. However, if you live in a battleground state, if you live in a Pennsylvania, if you live even in a Virginia or a Nevada, Georgia, then you got two similar sized megaphones, and you're fighting to be the loudest person in the room. And so that's really what I would say is, sure, if unless you are living in a state where it's pretty much decided, California and Illinois, New York probably, then vote with the understanding of there are two candidates in this race. Am I happy about that? No, I wish we could kind of get into a third party system where we maybe have, I don't know, ranked choice or something. We could have those conversations.
Oh, ranked choice would be terrible. They would rig it nonstop. You know that.
Like I said, I want to have those conversations, but that's not where we're at right now. Where we're at right now is we have a two-party system. And so you have two candidates. And if you want to vote for another one because you think you're edgy, go listen to My Chemical Romance and have fun in the Black Parade.
I want to ask you guys, what do you think about this? So historically speaking, vice presidents themselves haven't been a significant factor when it comes down to swaying voters. So the vice presidential debate has never really mattered or swayed any voters. But I think this time it's pretty unique, right? Because of the circumstance we have. It's not an incumbent president running for president. There's the whole, switch up and whatnot. Trump hasn't. We got to. Are they on already? Are we starting? Are we live? But yeah, guys,
it seems like
it's about to start. So
can you guys hear the? Can you guys hear the stream?
Yes, I can hear.
Yeah, okay, definitely. It's a little low, but I think we're
stage. So
because the volume's low, right?
Here and join us also on our streaming channel, CBS News 24/7, for exclusive content you won't see anywhere else.
For some reason,
thank you
can't
for
really
joining
hear.
us.
There we go, kind of. But yeah, I think this is going to play a significant factor in the election, especially like in these people that are still undecided. They haven't seen Trump much. Well, they've seen Trump a lot, don't get me wrong, but they haven't seen Kamala much. And I feel like this is Kamala's campaign last opportunity to really deliver a message of who they are.
Absolutely. What I will say is once the debate actually starts, maybe we should mute our mics. If we mute our mics, the audio on the screen might be
Tonight, with just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become vice president of the United States. Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America Decides, the vice presidential debate.
Good evening. I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance, tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact.
It would seem as though it got cut off.
Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed. thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together, understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose?
How convenient. His time is up.
Iran, you have to.
When he's done talking. What an idiot.
Answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit, because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have
He's
a
trying to sell that Trump is fickle. It's not going to sell.
parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blamed Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job. And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the climate.
your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil, but the folks know, and like I said, again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And an all above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora.
We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state, a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again.
Who stopped it, you
after he came
idiot?
down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was,
His
will you
time's
separate
always
parents
up
from their
after
children,
he's done talking.
even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary. But the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our border czar, Kamala Harris, has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans.
It's weird for a communist to say that.
This bill does it. It's funded, it's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
we're
because
going to turn now to the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys
economy,
weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much.
the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
want to have
One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
Cut your mic?
Yeah, let them debate. They're actually debating. What the hell is this?
Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan. So let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it. It would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best. More people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom, because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say, look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on healthcare then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am.
Still hasn't answered the question.
Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people.
Cut that. I'm a knucklehead, and that'll be a new Trump ad.
And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people.
JD Vance's response should be like, you didn't actually answer the question.
So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Roast them, JD, roast them.
On that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said.
He has so many. No, it was not just one time that he came to be in Tiananmen Square. It's been like over 20 years.
And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor.
He's just killed himself right now.
In 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews, is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care.
And they always use the anecdotal story.
And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator.
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me. But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So
I feel like they're spending
fact-checked it with
way more
President
time
Trump.
on abortion than they did on the
Gentlemen,
economy.
there's a lot to
And I
discuss.
think
We have
that's
to move on, and we're going to be
purposeful
right
by the
back with much
moderators.
more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Okay, so they're taking a quick break. I want to take a moment, especially as we're wrapping that up. I want to discuss the Amber Thurman case real quick, because that's what they just got finished talking about. The Amber Thurman case was radically reductive in terms of the way that Tim Walz discussed it. In fact, Thurman traveled to North Carolina to receive mifepristone and misoprostol, which are known as pretty dangerous drugs. They're the abortion pills, and they can result in complications that lead to instances, as in some cases, death. And Amber Thurman is an instance in which taking the drug included a complication where the abortion did not fully take place. The unborn child did not fully exit her system. She ultimately got sepsis due to an infection caused by the abortion she had from the drug, and thus she died actually in a complication due to abortion and not due to a lack of being able to receive abortion care. Had she not attempted to have an abortion in the first place, Amber would still be alive.
Yeah, I think JD Vance, I know it's a tight situation he's in, but he could have hit on the fact that you put tampons in boys' bathroom. You allowed your state to become a sanctuary state so kids can run away from their parents and go and be in the warm embracing arms of the government and say, well, we know better than your parents. You can have abortions. He could have hit on so many things. And when he said women's rights, he could have hit on the fact that, okay, so is it a women's right to have males competing with them and hurting them very drastically in sports? And then if they speak out, they essentially get canceled, like we've seen so many people have done. Are those women's rights? Is it a woman's right to be scared when she walks on the street because there's illegal migrants that are following them and raping them and killing them, as we see happen many, many times in the last year? So there's a lot of things that he could have said. I know it's a time crunch, but for anyone listening, this is what Tim Walz has supported.
What I like that he actually did, though, is that he flipped the script just like Trump did back in 2016. And he made sure that the Democrats look like the extreme ones here. He questioned the governor multiple times and tried to get an answer from him. And he didn't give him an answer because he kept dancing around it, because he knows that it's a very extreme policy that he has in place when it comes down to abortions. He didn't answer. Are you able to get in, or not even able? Do you support a late-term abortion in the 9th month? And he didn't answer that. Why? because he understands that he has a dilemma with with in general his base, which supports that kind of stuff, and moderates who don't want that kind of stuff. Actually, let me give you the statistic is that Americans do support abortion up to the first trimester. But then when you talk about a second trimester abortion, it dips down to about 30%. And then when you talk about a third trimester abortion, we're talking about 9% of Americans to support that position. Yet you have Minnesota, who we were talking about before the show, has implemented the most extreme sides of the Democrat policy. And we're seeing that play out in front of us on a topic that I think Democrats are supposed to beat Republicans nonstop on, right? But here we are. Flipping the script on them.
Absolutely. Even with that, I want to point out a few more things you might notice if you keep watching on the debate. A few great things that JD Vance is doing. I know that there's a few more things that he should be hitting harder on, but great things that you might not even notice that are affecting the way a voter thinks. First is he's calling his opponent Tim. He's not saying the governor or Governor Walz. He is saying Tim, which removes the idea that he holds any type of leadership position and is capable of leadership. He also kind of came into him and said, you've got a pretty tough job here, kind of leveling with the governor. Exactly. He's not going against, he's saying, look, I sympathize with you. I know your positions are hard to take. I know Kamala isn't a very good vice president. I know it's got to be difficult having to answer for the lack of quality in the candidate that you are with. He's leveling with me. He's doing a great job. I think the biggest thing that I'm also noticing is JD Vance seems to be ready to take the presidency, and he's showing that he's ready to become president if necessary. Can we really say the same thing about Tim Walz? And I think we're coming back right here.
We'll be right
back. Welcome back to the CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools, we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises
I thought it was the corporate speculators,
down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. First, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as
once again, his time is always up after he's done talking.
Lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens? If you lower energy prices, as Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill, one of the biggest drivers of housing costs aside from illegal immigration is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment, but Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts.
It's not an allegation. It is a fact.
Look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find.
That's a lie.
I was going to ask on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, We protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to.
If it's not a commodity, then what is it?
Make some investments.
Flipping
that gets
Tommy.
people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor,
Where's
your
the study?
time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local. Many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you
He should bring up RFK
pre-existing
right here.
conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. I think it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill, but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think it's an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do. But I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is—
So you think the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families, cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, childcare options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the childcare shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the childcare shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide childcare options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarship types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation.
The state of
After
the
the
democracy.
2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square. And that's all I've said. And that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course,
Good
they don't
segue.
agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day. Some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator,
what were the George Floyd
adjudicated over and
protesters
over and over.
chanting
I
in
worked with
Minneapolis,
troops long enough to
Timmy?
know, and I said, as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later
not the first
in
time.
the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret? Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
Okay.
Wow. So Tim Walz completely side-skirted the question of the First Amendment, and I think that was huge. He wouldn't even acknowledge it, not even acknowledge it, which is incredibly scary. Him and Kamala Harris
just
both said
sidestepping it. He just showed how little he actually knows about multiple amendments in that segment. I mean, he discussed the Second Amendment and said taking away a gun isn't a violation of your Second Amendment. Radically reductive of what the Second Amendment actually is about, what it's intended for. And I guess to some extent it needs to be reductive because you don't actually have enough time to debate the full workings of the Second Amendment, despite the fact that it's pretty clear the reason for it was to fight back against a tyrannical government, meaning that technically you should be allowed to fight back against your federal government, meaning a citizen should be allowed to own whatever weapon the government owns. But along with that, I think the First Amendment, like you said, was poorly discussed. I think a huge part, though, that what J.D. Vance missed on, and I hope maybe he'll hit on it a little bit sooner, is when we talk about a threat to democracy. Well, one, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. Another larger debate that probably doesn't need to happen here. But if we're going to talk about a threat to democracy, let's talk about the fact of Kamala Harris's candidacy in and of itself. Why is nobody discussing? Why has it become old news that the current candidate for the for the largest party in America, the Democrat Party, root in democracy, being very pro-democracy, has a candidate that has not received a single vote from a layman for her candidacy? No average person voted for her. They voted for her to be vice president. Not a single person voted for her to be the presidential candidate. The person that they voted for, Joe Biden, was removed by the oligarchs of the party. Is no one going to talk about that being a threat to democracy? How is that not the biggest threat to democracy? I don't care about some people in MAGA hats going into a public building and causing some damage. I care about the fact that our entire institution of voting has been sidestepped publicly, like literally. You
But
wanna
Kevin,
talk about
they know better than us though, because they are the oligarchs. So we should just listen to them, not have to vote, and just do whatever they say. And actually, you can't even say whatever you want to say, because then you'll end up in prison or something.
But that's exactly what I mean. It's like that is the antithesis of democracy, and not a single person from the Democrat Party wants to talk about it. So why? That's the one thing I think JD Vance failed, that he didn't say anything about that. But
I also agree with you, Kev, because I think that he failed to also capitalize on the opportunity to say that the real threat to democracy is everything that the Democrats have done to illustrate that individuals that oppose their political ideology are somehow enemies of state. That the direct rhetoric that has radicalized their base to lead them to truly carry out atrocious things, like to try and attempt to assassinate a former president. And potentially,
are we just going to forget all of that? Like all of the news.
And this is what's pissed me off just across the debate that Trump and Kamala had. Yep, exactly. In this debate, have we heard a moderator bring that up at all? Like, no. That's historic, right? There's been 2 attempted assassination attempts on former President Trump, and neither debate, none of the moderators brought that up as a question, not even for 1 minute to talk about. And that is ridiculous. But sure as hell, they talked about how January 6th was a threat to democracy. Not that people are quite literally trying to kill former President Trump
at this very moment. And we still don't know a lot about what happened with the shooters, what their motivations were, and a lot of other things. You know, there's a lot of unsaid things that have been that have not been said in this debate. And, you know, again, I know it's fast moving. You're dealing with the moderators, dealing with Tim Walz being Mr. Frogman, which is my new nickname for him. But I mean, I would bring this stuff up. I'd say exactly what you guys said, and I would keep hammering on the First Amendment issue, because it is a critical issue. And I think we're about to get back here to the debates. Let's pull it back up.
Yep. Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country, and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something, not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that too has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder.
Let's recap some of that. I know we
Let's
started
do it.
to a little bit. I did want to point out, I think one interesting comment that we got here was from Hippie, and this made me think a lot. I'm writing this one down. A threat to democracy is democracy itself. Very deep, and I think worth pondering for a lot of people out there. In and of itself, democracy is going to threaten itself because a sense of democracy, I mean, you could go back and forth about 51% ruling over the other 49. But this is something I talk about with our own system, and this debate is just perfectly emblematic of it, is the fact that to be in a society that gives you the power to vote for your representatives hits on a quote from Uncle Ben in Spider-Man. It's the fact that with great power comes great responsibility. And in the fact that we have a government that we decide our elected officials, albeit you might feel insignificant with your singular vote in a sea of millions, you do have a great power and a great responsibility to vote for those that are going to lead the most powerful nation on the face of the planet. And so a threat to democracy is democracy itself, in the fact that if you're an uninformed or a stupid voter, then you yourself are threatening the very thing that we call democracy, a representative republic. So that's kind of just something I think to kind of start this off with. What did you guys think about closing statements? What we just heard from the two candidates?
So first of all, I kind of took some notes down. So at the very beginning, they obviously started off by talking about what happened today, which is Iran attacking Israel. And I think what Tim Walz tried to do there is try to paint Trump as somebody that's weak, and that when Trump is in office, the dictators, our adversaries, they're all emboldened, like Iran, China, Russia, which is just objectively false. First of all, Trump brokered Abraham Accords. There was historical peace in the Middle East that we've never seen before. We saw Israel open its doors up, and predominantly Arab countries open their doors up to trade, because everybody likes to make money. And when everybody's making money, there is peace. And that's exactly what was about to start to happen until October 7th, unfortunately, because Iran understood at some point Saudi Arabia is going to go into this. He took out the ISIS caliphate. He killed Soleimani, and Iran didn't do a single thing. There was no Afghanistan chaos. Please tell me, Tim Walz, how is Trump weak when it comes down to the international stage? Do I have to remind people that Putin broke his pattern for the first time since becoming the head of the state, right? He invaded or took parts of regions under every single president except Trump. Why is that? Because he didn't know what would happen if he did what he just did in the last few years, move into Ukraine. Iran didn't try to attempt to do anything. In fact, Iran, the mullahs, were bankrupt. Why? Because they weren't able to sell barrels of oils for $100 on the market. And now they've been able to do that for a while. They became rich. Now they funded their proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah and destabilized the region again. Immigration. I think that JD Vance was so powerful on immigration because he didn't refer to the usual argument that I would talk about of like how to stop the flow of migrants coming up there. He actually flipped it and said that everything that is happening right now regarding fentanyl, specifically fentanyl, which people can feel outside of being close to the border, especially up in the Northeast, those blue collar areas, they feel that feeling. So he actually dig deeper. So majority of average Americans can actually understand immigration more than just illegal immigration, actually how it is impacting your public safety. Economic policies. Tim Walz said the same dang thing that we hear 99% of the sheep say when they come on our TikTok live. Trump's tax code plan was only benefiting the wealthies. Objectively, not true. If we look at IRS data, we can see that individuals earning between $15,000 to $50,000 a year received a 26% tax cut. Individuals between $50,000 to $100,000 received 15 to 17% tax cut. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like the average American to me, earning between $50,000 to $100,000. So everything we actually heard tonight was just a bunch of talking points, a lot of straw men that's coming from Tim Walz, and JD Vance just hammered every single one with fact checking it and then also doing something that actually relates to the American people. So great job. Missed a couple opportunities, but overall did great. And Polymarket reflects that because leading up to the debate, they said that Tim Walz had an 85% chance of winning the debate. I mind you, these are people betting with their money. So I trust these kind of polls. Well, now I'm looking at it. What they have them at is at 39%. So
I can't believe it. They actually would have given him that high. I mean, especially with, but
we don't know who's putting money in. It could be some more. It could really be anyone just to shift the numbers. And I've said this about Polymarket. It's great, and I love that people are betting their money. But you can have someone with a lot of money go in and shift the things, But one thing that I did like that that JD Vance did was that in this kind of open dialogue, I know it was very fractious with the debaters, or rather with the moderators and the debaters as well. But he was able to give the American people something more than just a soundbite. Because for the last 4 years, especially voters who are voting for the first time or don't remember how things were, all they hear is vitriol especially from the left, these small sound bites or whatever's on the mainstream media, or they basically read a headline in like a few paragraphs. But what he was able to do is give the American people a concise argument on why the Republican Party has ideas in a long format, unbroken most of the time. And he actually put it into a macro perspective. He says, look, energy is an issue. Housing is an issue. And he actually broke it down to the most minute levels and said, and this is how it's affecting you because it affected me when I was young. So he was able to cast that vision upon people, which a lot of people, I'm sure, independents and on the left, or even maybe on the right, have not heard from a conservative in a very long time, because there's been so much hate towards Donald Trump with the media.
No, you're absolutely right. Obviously, I was taking copious notes throughout this entire thing. And yes, JD Vance, I even wrote down at one point, I was like, he speaks like a lawyer. I mean, this is like the same kind of thing that I learn in my classes when I'm not just learning simply like the case law in and of itself. He at one point, like he was explaining things. He was like, if this is the case of insert issue, if this is the case of immigration, if this is the case of housing, if we are in a housing crisis, then X must be solution or the reason, the root cause that we must address. Kamala Harris does the opposite. If prices of goods are the issue, then there must be an influx of money in the market. So we must work on reducing the influx and lower spending, etc., reducing taxes, whatever. Kamala Harris claims it's price gouging. This is the kind of that's not a perfect example of exactly what he said, but this is what he did. He speaks like a lawyer and creates a logical flow of communication that makes it easily digestible to your average American. So then they don't have to go through legalese, but they also aren't spoken to through TikTok speak or soundbite, which is exactly what Tim Walz did during his closing statement. Tim Walz, he said, we need to have a government that's better than it is. He said we need to have our new way forward. We need to have
joy.
A government of joy. Yes, a government of joy. He also called it a new day. Join us. Things like that. It was if you listen to the last 30 seconds plus of his closing statement, it was all of these little sound bites throwing. It almost sounded like he was throwing tomatoes at a wall and seeing which one, and the proverbial tomatoes.
Could it be the Tim Walz?
His slogans, throwing them, waiting to see which one would stick to Tim's walls. So there was that. I think we go back to some of the things that we touched on briefly. They had a very long exchange of gun violence. Not a single time do they bring up assassination attempts. While JD Vance hit on a good topic that a lot of people don't talk about, which is the illegal obtaining of firearms and tying that back to the silver border. Great job. However, another great instance in which we could talk about assassination attempts against the former president. And then we can bring in different things about the political speech that we have. I do think something that'll be very, very receptive, or a lot of the American public will be receptive to, is this was a very civil debate. And I'm curious what you guys think about that. There was even times where I felt like a lot of times in other debates, we have a pissing contest of who can get the better sound bite between like Kamala and Trump or something like that. In this debate, I felt like there was almost a pissing contest of who could be nicer to the other in terms of like, there was times where JD Vance was like, I didn't know your son went through a school or through a shooting. Like, I'm so sorry to hear that. Or there was times in which Tim Walz would be like searching for common ground and things. And I think that's a very, very different side of American politics that we haven't seen in a very long time. The idea
And that's exactly what we need to get back to, because American people actually like that, I think. And I think that that's how we can bring back America to what it was before we became so divisive, especially at your Thanksgiving table with your own family, right? Wouldn't you like to just be able to, if you do end up talking about politics with your family at the Thanksgiving table, to at least to have a civil, tolerant discussion like you just saw these two individuals have during the debate? The only way we can get back to that is by having more and more of this sort of discourse, which that's what we need. We need civility in political discourse. We need to have tolerance to other individuals' opposing arguments. And these two gentlemen actually showed us that it's very possible to do. And we as Americans have benefited from this way more than any other debate where there wasn't civility. Why? Because there was so much information and detail regarding policy, because at the end of the day, none of these gotcha moments or he said that or whatever it is actually will benefit you as an American. But the policy, that is what will benefit you. And the only way that we can truly know anything about policy is if we have this good civil political discourse. And I really did enjoy that. And the one other thing that I liked is that when JD Vance said, hey, if you do win, I'll shake your hand and I'll offer my prayers and my, help and blessings and all this various stuff. At the end of the day, we're Americans. We want to make sure that America succeeds. And that's the best way to represent that and show that.
Yeah, I think one thing that people watching need to be aware of is like, this is a Tim Walz that's been very polished and made to deliver a message to try to sway you to vote for them. But then when you look at all the policies that him and Harris have enacted, what they've done with the border, even going back to when she was a DA of San Francisco, it's terrible. These are socialist policies. These are communist policies. They even adopted a communist line of it's a campaign of joy. And I would say, if you're listening to this, type in James Lindsay, The Politics of Joy. He has an incredible 2-hour podcast where he actually goes into depth on how the communists use things like the specific word joy to try to change the reality of what you see outside, the destitution, just a rampant crime, and the inability to purchase basic goods for your home and for your family. And basically do like a mind control over you to say, well, no, but it's okay because I have joy. And it's this really weird alternate reality that they try to get people to live in and not focus on what's really happening, because that's a way that they can remain in power and do the same policies that they have. And things get worse and worse. And they convince people it's okay. Just have joy.
No, exactly. One more thing that I just want to add before I throw it back to you, Kev, is that I think that JD Vance actually relied on this whole debate actually being civil, because the way the media has painted him, and I think that the reflection that the voters have on him is that he was this big, mean, bully guy. Like, he's very hostile and whatnot. But I think that he showed right there on the stage, no, he's not. He's just firm and believes what he's firm in what he believes, and he will engage in a civil discourse with you. He's not going to bully you. He's not going to belittle you. He's not going to accuse you of certain things just because you hold that position. No, he's going to try and beat you by trying to convince you that his policy or his initiatives are actually the ones that will make America better.
No, I think you're absolutely right on that. And I think that's why he was very skilled on even some of the hardest questions he was asked. One of which is abortion. And he kind of said something out loud that I think it was very important when it came to the abortion issue, where he kind of said like what a lot of what a lot of Republicans know, but don't like to talk about, because obviously you have a lot of single issue voters, especially in the Christian world, about abortion. And I'm unapologetically pro-life, but it's no secret among Republican circles that Republicans are losing on this issue, and a lot of times it has to do with their rhetoric around it. And that's exactly what JD Vance got up there and said. A lot of Republicans are afraid to say that. That's not saying that you shouldn't be pro-life, and that's exactly what JD said. But he said that there are conversations that need to happen, and they need to come from a place of compassion, and that's exactly what JD Vance said. As Tim Walz still trotted out the age-old answer of it's not about killing babies, it's about being pro-woman. Okay, Tim Walz, if you're pro-woman, then why don't we talk about being pro-Laken Riley, pro-Molly Tippett, pro-Rachel Morin, pro-Lisbeth Medina, pro-Kate Steiners, pro-Sarah Root. Like the list goes on of the women that have been raped and murdered by illegal immigrants that have crossed the border pretty much with no check, if not even let go out of custody under the Biden administration. If you want to be pro-woman, we could talk about the issue of abortion, or the instance that he brought up of Amber Thurman, who was actually died of sepsis because of complications due to her abortion pill that she took. Or we could talk about the countless women who have been, if not murdered, trafficked through America through illegal means across our southern border. But Tim Walz doesn't want to talk about that. And not to mention, once again, as I did quickly during the debate, it seemed like we spent double, if not even triple the time on the topic of abortion instead of talking about the economy, which seems to be the issue that is on much more of Americans' minds. But
yeah, exactly. I want to leave you guys with my Twitter status because I'm pretty proud of it. During the debate, I said, Tim Walz is more confused than Kamala Harris at a Diddy party. And so those will be my closing lines. Thank you, everyone, for joining in so much. Make sure that you follow everyone here on the ticker. You can get our @, so you can follow us. Speechless with Kev. David is David_Kate, and mine right there is Fabian LUXE. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure that you tune into all of our live streams coming up very soon, because we are back on track with the live streams.
Yeah, catch us live streaming.
Catch us live streaming. It'll be great. Like, subscribe, share, comments. God bless you. God bless America.